next speaker is Dr. Narasimha Murthy. He is Assistant Professor of English, Presidency University, Bangalore, India. He got a Distinguished Resource Person Award from Lavender Literary Club. He has 35 years of academic experience. He had many academic achievements, and he's a BOS member of Jain University, Bangalore, and he published several articles and research papers in international journals, and he worked as a resource person in more than 10 conferences, and he is working as a research guide. Now I hand over the section to you, sir.
Good evening, everybody. And my topic today is structuring a research thesis. Structure of a research thesis. Usually, every researcher, I have found this very common among our research fraternity. They will work hard, very hard. They struggle, toil, and they do a lot of gymnastics. I always call it gymnastics. But when it comes to writing, we must have collected a lot of material. Sometimes I have seen students, researchers collecting material to the extent of 500 pages, 600 pages. And then it becomes a monotonous or the most kind of a frenzy activity during the last few months. And when I look at that, sometimes I wonder, because I was one of them. And when I wrote my doctoral thesis, usually in India we call it thesis, but in the Western part they call it dissertation. So being an Indian, I'll use the word thesis only. So when I first gave my draft to my supervisor, it was almost 415 pages. Then he told me, and jokingly, we can have 2 doctorates from this. And he asked me to cut short, and of course, even that was done. But remember a few things. When you start writing, never follow the chronological order. When I say chronological order, we all begin with chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. No, never make that mistake. Because at one point of time, you have to begin writing. And remember, it is better to work on each chapter individually, separately. And remember, what is pertinent at that moment, just concentrate on that. And leave it for some time, come back after some time. And definitely you can work in a consistent, coherent piece and restructuring section. So what is a thesis then? What is a thesis? What is research? I will not venture into a question of research, because Professor Balaji, had almost made my way very easy. A thesis or a research is a PhD, for that matter, is the acquisition and dissemination of new knowledge. The moment you say you are writing a thesis, you are acquiring and you are disseminating a new knowledge in that area of study. Therefore, a PhD thesis must contain these 3 things very significantly. First, it should have knowledge. That means you should be able to expose the knowledge that you have gained from this huge task. And your understanding of the topic should be clearly visible in that thesis. Not only that, appreciation of the area that you have worked. So these 3, first, this is one. Second thing, a critical analysis of related work. For example, now I'll talk as a. Now I heard Balaji sir was talking about a lot of technical things. Now being an English teacher, I would like to connect with critical analysis. See, we use one theoretical framework, but it can be gender studies, it can be post-colonial criticism, it can be subaltern studies, it can be anything, black feminism, cultural studies. So when you take a work, related work, you're going to apply that theoretical framework and look it from different angles. Then most important thing, is the importance or the relevance of your own work. This is very significant. So these three things must be clearly visible in any PhD thesis. So next, you know, Professor Balaji was mentioning about this. So I will just run through this because I don't want redundancy here. Any thesis will have the following parts: a title page, an abstract, acknowledgements, content page or pages, introduction, literature review. Sometimes it may come within the introduction, materials or sources or methods, themed topic chapters, results, discussions or findings, conclusions, your publications, references, appendices. So this is the usually structure of any good thesis, PhD thesis. Usually, I'm not saying this should be. Usually, sometimes every institution, every guide, supervisor, has a different plans of his own, depending on the nature of the study, depending on the nature of the topic. So minor changes will be there, but all in all, these things are most common. Again, I'll run through this because these are the main sections of a PhD thesis. And let us look at the basic components of a PhD thesis format. When I say, what I mean, the structure, how do you structure it? The first is the abstract. The most important thing of any research article or research paper is an abstract. It is nothing but a brief summary of which outlines your research. And remember, it should touch on all the main sections of the whole work. And not only that, it should outline your contribution. Most important thing in an abstract is you should bring out what is your contribution. What is that knowledge that you are gaining and you are sharing? And remember, abstract should answer this very important question: why is this important? When I say why is this means the research question. Why is your research question important? And the abstract should answer this question. The next one is introduction. It will help the reader to understand the entire dissertation, entire thesis. It is like two important things, like what is your paper about or why it's important. And a small description of methodology should be there. Remember, an introduction is a kind of an expansion of your abstract. Then it's followed by literature review. I'm going to deal all these things in detail. I'm only just giving you a brief kind of a synopsis. Okay. The story, literature review is nothing but, see, we cannot do any research without knowing the story of the work that's already been done. We should be aware of what is happening, the current affairs in your in your area of study. It's a kind of, covering the history of the topic, going back, digging deep. And this will help you to put your study suitable or not, kind of a fitting into the present and of course also the future also. I'll just give an example. Can anyone think of doing research on Shakespeare today? I'm expecting an answer. Can someone think of possibility of doing a research, a PhD research on Shakespeare?
Yes. Yes, dog.
Yeah, thank you. What about others?
Yes.
You go to a supervisor, usually the supervisors discourage you.
Namaste.
The reason being, lot of research has been done on Shakespeare. But my question is, if you can contextualize Shakespeare to the present day and study him from post-colonial perspective, cultural studies perspective, eco-criticism, eco-feminism perspective, you know, Shakespeare or any writer becomes relevant. Only thing is you should do your literature review properly. If the literature review is perfect, then you can be very sure of your doctoral degree award. And then for this, this will help you to get a theoretical framework, theory framework. Any student who comes to the supervisor, first thing you will be asked to choose a topic. The second thing is ultimately or immediately, will be theoretical framework, because you have to make certain assumptions and you have to explain the review what theoretical concepts that you might use or you may want to use. And remember how this theoretical concepts, relate to the existing knowledge and ideas. The next is methods, that is methodology, approach. Usually, this is a very detailed and descriptive part of a thesis because it discusses the specific techniques that you use to arrive at some conclusion, arrive at some discussion, to get some information. And remember, these methods, how are they relevant and appropriate? Specifically used for each method described, because everything we always say, for example, when I was doing my research, I was thinking of psychoanalytic approach, psychoanalytical theory, and reader's response theory. All these things, I was discussing, and my supervisor had a very simple answer. Very simple answer. Okay, how do you relate it? How do you relate your study to this? Finally, I concluded that post-colonial criticism would be ideal for my thesis. But now, after some years, I feel that I could have done much. I could have used other theories. Other theories. Okay, so as the time passes, our outlook and our perspective also changes. But remember, you should go with the wind only. And results are nothing but your empirical findings. And usually they will be straightforward, technical, and full of details. And you will have a discussion where you want to show the reviewer that you know what you are talking about. That means you have understood. You have understood very well what you are discussing. And not only that, you will push the new information that you learned. So you are going to exhibit what are your gains from this research and before making your conclusion. Finally, conclusion. It's a kind of a taking a step back and reflect on your research questions, original goals, intentions, and you're going to say whether you have fulfilled them or not, whether you have answered them or not. And remember, outline them in the context of your new findings and expertise. So this is basically an outline or a structure of a thesis that we find in literature. See, I am very exclusive here. I'm limiting myself to literature or English language studies, particularly literature, because I come from literature background. So, any technical questions, please. Uh, I may not be able to give you proper answer, but one thing I'll tell you, I'll be concentrating on uh, English related thesis only, because I know that most of us, I'm including myself, are teachers of English. Most of us are. So coming back to this, now I have told you what is an abstract. What an abstract is, we have discussed, we have seen, and I'll again give you. It's a short summary. It sums up the research, summarizes, outlines the contribution. These are the things that we should include, or an abstract should speak of. Now, there are some questions when you structure an abstract, when you plan an abstract, writing an abstract, you should be able to highlight or bring out these things. And remember, there again, now I want you to follow chronologically here. Chronology here in particular. The first thing, the moment you start writing your abstract, first you should mention, why are you writing this? What is the reason for writing the thesis? What is that made you, provoked you to come out with this writing of an article or thesis for that matter? And the second thing, when you structure in the order, it should be, what are the current approaches? So this is most important, because you are going to choose a theoretical framework. The moment I say approach, it is a theoretical framework. You should discuss all of them, and you can choose any one. And remember, before choosing, you should be able to justify. And not only that, you should be able to identify the gaps. See, every research supervisor will talk about the gaps. Identify the gaps. Identify the gaps. What are the approaches and what are the gaps? Again, that should come in. And after that, it should be followed by research question or questions, and aims or objectives of the research. Next part is methodology. What is your approach? What is your methodology that you are going to use here? And next, what are your main findings? That means, what is your contribution? What did you gain? What are you coming out with? What is the knowledge that you are disseminating? What is that? Finally, your abstract should follow a conclusion, main conclusions, and its implications in the present scenario. So, structure and abstract, remember these things. The first thing is reason for writing. The second is current approaches and gaps. Next, research questions and objectives or aims. Next, methodology. Then main findings, and finally conclusions and implications. So this is how you should structure your abstract. Not only structuring the thesis, even in the thesis, how to structure an abstract. This will help you to make your point very, very clear. Remember, the earlier speaker, Balaji sir, was speaking about the motivation. The motivation. And one thing that I observed, what is my motivation? My motivation was only getting a DR in front of my name to begin with. To begin with, because I wanted to be called as a doctor. Because once you get that DR, 2 letters, you will understand the significance or the importance. Of course, other things will follow automatically, but that's one of the major motivations I had. Remember, I'm using a past tense. Then the introduction. How do we structure an introduction? See, any introduction should serve these three purposes. The first one, it should establish the territory, the area, the field of study. For example, I would like to work on Anita Desai's novels. Anita Desai's novels. And I cannot study all the novels. I cannot study all the novels. Then I have to narrow it down. That is what territory. Am I speaking about only these particular 4 or 5 novels? After that, you should establish and justify your niche, your position, your stance, your outlook, your presentation. Then explain the significance of your research. See, in introduction, these things they become very important. When you structure it, begin with establishing your territory. Then establish and justify your position, stance, your viewpoint. Then talk about the significance of your research. Because anybody who reads your research, should be able to tell all about your work. It's a kind of a mini a mini thesis. It should be. For example, what the thesis is about. It should come out very clearly. Why it is important. How did you conduct your research? Methodology, approach, how it is laid out. Again, methodology, approach, and how do you bifurcate different chapters. All these things will come in introduction. Then one more very significant thing for any research, is the literature review. I told you. Sometimes most of our research supervisors, we ask our students to include this in the introduction itself. But some universities, they're very particular about making literature review a separate and individual chapter. Remember, if you want to make something new, you should know how does the old looks like. You should know. And that means if you want to contribute something new, you should know what's happening. Here, I remember one critical essay by T.S. Eliot, Tradition and the Individual Talent. And whenever I talk of literature review, I always remember this essay. There is a tradition. There is a tradition. You can come out of the tradition and contribute something. That is new. But once you contribute that, that will automatically seep into the tradition. So like that, you should have complete knowledge of the tradition, complete knowledge of what is happening in that area of study, because you can use this literature review to trace the lineage of your study. You can find out. For example, I was talking about Shakespeare. You can definitely, even today, I'll tell you, it is relevant, because Shakespeare's thoughts and ideas and writings are relevant forever. So when you write a literature review, think of these things. Summarize what has already been discussed in your field. This should be the first thing that you should focus on. The purpose is to show that yes, you have understood. You have understood what is happening in this current, what is the current affairs in this. Not only that, you can also relate how your study is related to this, or how your study is different from this. And next thing, next section will be highlight the gaps. See, the very purpose of literature review is to find out the gaps, then problems or shortcomings in the existing research area. This will clearly tell the reader that you are going to give something new. This will help the reader to guess that some novelty can be expected from your work. Not only that, identify the important studies, theories, methods, or theoretical frameworks that can be applied in your research. Usually, we will take one major theory, but that does not mean that we will not touch upon other theories. There will be at least 2 to 3 theoretical frameworks you can use depending on the nature of the topic and the scope and the purpose of your argument. Look at this. See, I always consider literature review very significant because it will guide you properly. It's very simple. I always talk about these steps. Usually, the moment a student comes to a supervisor, he'll come with a broad topic like Indian literature. I had made that mistake. African literature. And supervisor, African literature. Excellent. Then sneak into that. Find the way in. Good. Indian literature. Then start thinking. And also find out who is saying what and when. Different perspectives. Take notes. After doing all these things, definitely you have to narrow down the field. From Indian literature, you'll start looking at different concepts, different theoretical frameworks, different research areas of Indian literature, and naturally you'll narrow it down. Recently, I was talking to one of the research scholars from other university, and Indian literature. I'm taking that example. Finally, it was narrowed down to Mahesh Dattani. First Indian literature, then drama, then Mahesh Dattani. Again, we limited ourselves, narrowed down the sources. Only 4 plays that he took. After this, I asked him to think about the research questions that haven't been asked. This is your area of research. This is your contribution. Write early, write quickly, write relevantly. Start writing. See, this literature review, you should be able to give the reviewer, the examiner, a very clear idea about all these things. It is not just telling that I have referred 100 books, 200 websites. See, information or data is available in plenty, but how to structure them? Not only structure, how to make the person, the reader, the reviewer, very important, reviewer, to realize that your efforts should be recognized. Then there is another chapter called methodology chapter, methods. Usually one of the most descriptive chapter of this, but sometimes again, it depends. This is an optional chapter. This methods, usually it can come in the introduction itself. But as I told you, many universities these days are making it a point that methodology, methods, yes. How it's a kind of a summarizing, explaining, or recounting how you answered your research questions and how this relates to the methods used by other scholars in similar contexts or similar studies. Very simple, to discuss the techniques in detail. Not only that, why these techniques are relevant to the aims and objectives of the particular study. Not only that, you have to say, you should explain how you have used them effectively. You have to justify your theoretical framework, the selection of theoretical framework. So when you structure a methods chapter, you should follow some of these things. After reading this, people or the reviewer should be able to understand what did you do to achieve your research aims, or how did you achieve your research aims? Why did you choose this particular approach over others? As I told you, there are many theoretical frameworks available today in plenty of them. Why did you choose only this? Because most of the examiners will ask a question about theoretical framework approach. Why only this? And how does it relate to your epistemological or ontological positions? What are the tools that you use to collect data and why? There are many ways. Just now, Balaji sir was mentioning different methods of collecting data, different tools, and what are its implications, effects. When did you collect data? And from whom? I mean, sampling, he was talking about sampling. Again, what tools you have used to analyze the data and why? And these question number point number 4 and 5, 6, they look very statistical. Something that is not relevant to literature. I was thinking so earlier, but I don't think so now. Because literature review, you can use a lot of statistics and tools like this. And one of my students, in fact, he came out, with the help of another professor. He has come out with that we can make wonderful studies using these tools and data statistically. He has come out with an excellent paper on literature review only. I had never thought of that in the last. I have done almost 35 years of service. I had not seen this. Rather, I had not heard of this. But this is what research. It will give a new insight always. Then an empirical chapter. How do you structure it? First thing, you should talk about the results of your investigations. Second, how can you relate these findings to the previous studies? And did you find anything very astonishing, surprising in this? So something that did not work as you planned? Not only that, you are also talking about any themes or categories that emerged from this data. Can you see any specific format, pro forma, something that you may think that that has emerged out of this data? And remember, you should explain why you have reached particular conclusions. What is the basis? How do you arrive at this conclusion? And finally, you should explain the results. Should explain the results, and that means your findings, and also you should be able to justify them again and again. You should explain, making your stance very clear. Then I'm almost coming towards the end of my session, because I don't want to take much time. I prepared only for 45 to 50 minutes. How to structure a conclusion? See, conclusion is something very significant in any research writing process. It can be an article, it can be a book, or it can be a thesis. Remember, first and foremost thing, in a research thesis, have you completely and clearly articulated the answer to your research questions? Remember, we all begin with these research questions. And those research questions, you'll be always discussing all through the thesis, all through the article. Finally, you should be able to check, verify, because that is the motto of writing a conclusion. And how this research is related to your aims and objectives. This should be the second part of that. The third part, the significance of your work. Significance of your work. How important or how significant is your work, is your contribution? Mention that. It's not bragging, but you should establish. Should establish. And at the same time, you should outline its shortcomings. See, we will not be able to provide solution to everything. And that's not our intention also. Should talk about our limitations. When I say shortcomings, limitations of the research. Sometimes, this we can find in the introduction itself, kind of a defensive mechanism. And the last, suggest avenues for future research. After doing all these things, as I was telling, you will come out with different ideas. Make note them somewhere. Tell them, yes, yes. You can always talk about the further studies, future scope, research areas, always, so that this will give an indication that you have gone through the topic completely. Not only that, you know the further possibility of research. See, this will help the future researchers. Remember, in conclusion, most important thing, never introduce any new ideas or concepts. No, no new findings. It is only a kind of a reflecting back on your original aims and intentions. Now, why I'm telling this, by the time you come to write this part conclusion, you will have amassed a lot of knowledge. Your mind, will be blown out. Just discuss your aims and objectives of your research in terms of your findings and new expertise. That's all. So this is how you should structure a conclusion. Then these are some of the things that you must do, some do's in a conclusion. And the first one is own your research by speaking with authority. That means you should take responsibility. That means you should claim the ownership of your work with authority. That means you should express that sense of confidence that yes, it is my work. I have done this. That means how can you do that? For providing different evidences, supporting material, arguments, all that. And see the thesis, not the detail. What I mean here, you no need to shout. Let the thesis speak for you. And remember, every piece, every chapter is a piece in the puzzle. And they're all separate. But when you structure them properly, when you place them in their proper sequence or order, structure, the thesis becomes bigger than the sum of its individual chapter. Therefore, a great conclusion should be like a grand final, finale. And remember, by the time the reviewer, the reader has come to read your conclusion, he should have understood the following things. The research questions and objectives you should be able to, because you have spoken, you have discussed in your introduction, and again it's a kind of a connecting all through introduction and then coming to conclusion. A brief recount of the answer to these questions. Yes, how you answered these research questions. How you clearly have discussed the significance and implications of your new findings. The contribution that you have made, contribution that this study has made, and the claims you are making. Do they align with the content of the results and discussion chapters? So these things, when you structure properly, they will speak for themselves. They will do that. They will do that. Remember, each PhD is different. Each topic is different. And structure may diverge here and there. I'm not saying that this should be the structure. No, I'm sorry. It's okay if somebody says you go with this structure and your supervisor or your senior friends, senior researchers, they may say, oh, what is this? No. It's okay. Remember, every thesis will take its own direction. And definitely it will make you to mark off all the major sections properly. If the structure is not proper, ask yourself why. For example, I told you about the dedicated methods chapter. Sometimes it may not be necessary also. Your methodology or your, it may not require a whole chapter. No problem. And your literature review may be very, very short, because when I started working on my post-apartheid South African literature, very, very little material, very, very, very less, very few books, and secondary sources were very, very less. So my literature review actually it became very short. And then my supervisor encouraged me, it's okay, no problem. Whatever that you write will be a contribution, chalo. And remember, when you format your thesis, after this, I would like to give you some tips before I conclude. That is, don't try to write your PhD as a first draft. Never do that. Remember, any research article, research work, it's typically been edited, edited, and edited, and edited. I always tell my students, at least 4 to 5 times you have to edit, revise, edit, revise. Even in spite of all these things, we find mistakes. When we get thesis for evaluation, we find some typographical error, some silly grammar mistake. I'll just give one example. Recently, I saw a thesis. On the cover page, it was very clearly mentioned as THESES submitted. THESES. Now, such things, an English faculty must take care. Okay. And remember, always you plan, sit with your supervisor, structure and format. And remember, you should have a lot of patience at this point of time. Should be prepared to rewrite, work out of drafts. Thank God, today we have a lot of technology, rewriting and changing, adding, deleting. All these things are possible because it will be soft copy only. Never get discouraged. It's a process. It is typical. Remember, every person who has got this degree, has undergone this struggle. Usually, academic writing, they say, is dry. Try to make it interesting if possible. It is possible. And remember, as I told you in the beginning also, never think of writing in the chronological order. No. Because I always believe, I always tell my students, never think of introduction. No. Start writing chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5. Write conclusion. I always tell that. Write conclusion, draft, and then come to introduction. So that will help you to relate introduction with the conclusion or conclusion with the introduction, because they should support each other, complement each other. Don't rush things. Write a draft, leave it for some days. Come back. Look at it objectively. And here you should take the help of your peers. Grammatical errors, clarity, logic, flow, all these things, when you sit and write, you will not be able to identify the flaws. Take the help of peers, your seniors. And utilize tools there to organize them in a reference particularly. All these things have become very technical and mechanical now. And remember, very important thing is very easy to plagiarize. But you should give due credit to the original source. Give that. Then you can explain. That, see, here it is unethical unethical. And as a man of literature, no, I don't think that we are expected to be unethical. Let us follow research ethics. And I'll come to the last slide of my today's presentation. Key points. Whenever you think of a thesis structure, whenever you plan writing thesis, remember there should be a clear research questions or aims. Very clear. You should have clarity about your research questions. That means write your research questions. And remember, do not begin with research questions. Begin your complete your coursework, complete your literature review, then start thinking of. By then, you'll be able to concretize a few things about the topic, about your methodology, about your approach. Then think before you start writing, make at least some 5 to 8 research questions or the objectives. And remember, in answering these questions, it takes an argument. And remember, you have to support your argument. Remember, you have to support that argument. And when I say support, you need secondary sources. And this structure also should support your argument. And remember, an argument map. So that means you can map that. Can be very useful to guide you throughout your research project. So I wish all of you a very good research and all the best. And with this, words, I conclude. And my only piece of advice is, do not get discouraged when something goes wrong. When your supervisor says this may not be proper. Some supervisors can be very, very harsh also. I have seen both extremes. Very, very friendly supervisor was my PhD supervisor, and very, very meticulous and very strict, disciplined, grammarian supervisor for my MPhil. But I will tell you, my PhD became very easy because of my MPhil supervisor. She made me work. And remember, during these days, we used to write. Typewriter was new then, but still, we could not afford so much for typing. I did write my MPhil. I still remember my MPhil dissertation. Now I wrote 4 times, and that too, it was very clearly mentioned that I should fold one A4 sheet and write on one side. The other side is for comments. I wrote and wrote and wrote and rewrote, edit, revise, edit. My goodness. It was an Herculean task, but I learned a lot from that. Now, even today, I am benefited out of that practice. With this, I wish you all the best, and I would like to thank my friend Frank Satya Joyson for giving me this opportunity to refresh myself about structure of a thesis. Thank you very much. Yeah. I'll stop sharing. Shall I?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Dear participants, if you have any questions, you can ask.
People seem to be tired after almost 2 hours, 20 minutes of listening.
So, sir, that was wonderfully presented.
Thank you, Kasturi ma'am. Thank you very much for your instant feedback.
Hello, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Please.
I'm Dr. Mirali from Sri Satyasai Institute of Higher Learning, Andhra Pradesh. It was a very enriching presentation, sir. It was not at all boring, as you mentioned. It was really enriching because for literature, research methodology is little different, and we always, try to follow scientific methodology. Everybody tries to look for that scientific, approach to our thesis, which becomes really tough and challenging for us. So actually, through your presentation, you had given us many tips, many key points, how to keep it scientific as well as keep it very literary. So that was a real, great exposure to a very literary approach to research methodology. So very happy to have, attended your session. So a quick question.
Please.
Now, in between, you had asked about the Shakespeare topic.
Yeah.
So, of course, it is challenging to take up Shakespeare in today's time. It's not impossible. At the same time, it is challenging, definitely. But if at all somebody wants to take up such topics like Shakespeare or John Keats or Romantics, now the problem is our literature review, because it is so much, the literature is so much that a thesis could be written on literature itself, on these authors. So my question is, if at all somebody wants to take up, because it's not wrong, in literature nothing is obsolete, sir. So it's not wrong. So what do you suggest? How do we limit our literature review for such topics, sir?
Okay. Since you mentioned Keats, I'd like to take up romantics as a whole. So
Yes,
the moment you think of romantics, we think of nature, no? Wordsworth,
absolutely.
under Greenwood Tree, Keats, all these, Shelley, Skylark, Nightingale, all these things will come. So here, you can definitely think of eco-criticism, something very new field. Probably they would not have even dreamt of criticism or eco-criticism. You can
Yes, sir.
definitely apply that theory, and our literature review also, will be narrowed down by naturally. Definitely, this can be done. This can
Yes,
be done.
sir.
And
Yeah.
Shakespeare, I will tell you, Shakespeare's caliber became an example or something like a canon for post-colonial criticism. And people again, came back, started reading Shakespeare from different. For example, the better would be, Shylock's character,
Yes.
cultural studies.
Yes.
When you take Shylock, from cultural perspective, cultural studies perspective, Orientalism. Again, I'll go back to Edward Said's Orientalism. All these things, new literary theories we can apply, and we can look from different lenses. Different lenses. The wine is old only, but the way we are looking at, the straw that we
Yes.
are using to sip it is always new. It is possible. Only thing is, most of us, most of supervisors like you and me, we discourage
Yes.
our students.
Sir, new approaches are okay. My question is how to limit the literature review.
I told you, my answer. See, you take the first eco-criticism. You just type the word eco-criticism of
Keats.
romantics.
Romantics, right.
In generally, romantics. And see how much material that you can procure.
Right. I got you, sir.
So that, you will be able to decide whether enough work has been done. You'll be able to identify the gaps. And definitely, the moment you identify gaps, that is your work is 50% done.
Thank
I
you so
think
much.
I have answered
Yes,
your
sir. Yes, sir.
question, Karna.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Absolutely pleasure to listen to you, sir.
Thank you very much. You have made my day, doctor.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, there's one more.
I am Rohan Asad, PhD scholar student, computer university, mathematics department. So thank you so much. Today's topic was so interesting. Thank you. The topic was so interesting.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Mr. Asad. Though you are not audible clearly, I could listen here and there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think if there are, yeah, please.
Good evening, Murthy sir.
Good evening, Parvin ma'am.
Yes, good evening, sir. That was insightful presentation. I learned so much from the presentation. I'm really grateful for this, sir. Sir, you told we should, when we are writing thesis, we should not follow chronological order,
Yes,
right? You can
yes,
start
exactly.
you can start from between. Some professors insist on starting from introduction. Some of course guys insist on starting from the conclusion. So I don't know, one of the guide, she insisted on starting from the introduction part. I don't know why that guide, insisted on writing from the introduction. So what is your suggestions on this?
Let me admit one thing. The supervisors, most of us are whimsical. We believe in one structure of writing, and each loco binaruchi, it differs from person to person. Why I said no introduction? Because introduction should evolve from the other chapters.
Yes.
When you write introduction, it's a kind of scaffolding yourself. You will not be able to look here and there. You will not be explore anything new. So that is a kind of a limitation that you are imposing on yourself. See, I'm speaking out of personal experience, and after discussing with many research supervisors, research scholars, I feel that introduction and conclusion should come towards the end of the thesis writing, because that will give you a new insights. When you know what is the gist, what is the gist,
Mhm.
you can think of covering it in the front, covering it in the back.
Mhm.
Even when you write a novel, usually we write the novel first, then preface, then blurb, or blurb or preface. Now we need to revise, we need to edit all those things again and again. No, I'm only putting my viewpoint, and I'm also supporting my uh, viewpoint also. I wish that this would be convenient or easy to follow.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the
Thank
response.
you, thank
Thank
you,
you.
thank you, Parvin ma'am. Thank you.
Good night, sir.
Parvin ma'am is my colleague, so uh, we, we we discuss many things, and I know the context also.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Doc. Um, Good afternoon from Ghana, and good evening in India,
India.
and good morning in the rest of the world. My name is Harun Ibrahim. I'm a medical practitioner from Ghana. Um, I am come to ask a question in reference to the very one my participants, my colleague asked in terms of where to start when you are doing your research. And then you made mention that every researcher has its own approach where you have to adhere to the researchers, your supervisor's direction, which I perfectly understand. I attended a just ended conference. One of the presenters made mention that the best way to start a research is to start from discussion. Is to start from the discussion. Why did he say that? He said that the discussion gives you a broad idea, because the discussion, you've taken a data on the field and you are making all the effort to explain why you had the data, and then why you are justifying that this and this is the research problem, and then you've been able to identify the gaps and you have filled in the gap. You get it, Doc?
Yeah, tell me.
Yes, good. So with the angle that he came from, I tend to concur with him, because he was able to convince me enough that start from the discussion. That is the data you have picked from the field, bring it home, analyze it, and then when you are done with the discussion even gives you a broad idea. It limits you from being biased. One, it also limits you from going beyond your research topic, because sometimes you may, if you're not careful, you may go beyond your research area, or
Yeah.
the exact information that you want to bring out to your readers across the globe when it is finally published on the journal. So with your experience and with what I have been convinced enough in my recent past workshop that I attended, organized by Comorin Trust publishers and Comorin Trust. Cape Comorin Trust and Cape Comorin Trust publishers and Cape Comorin Trust. I want to ask you, what is your view about what I have been told by another researcher?
I think I have made this point very clear, but let me answer your question. For the last 10 minutes, I have been insisting, or throughout my session, I have been insisting not to worry about introduction and conclusion. When I say other chapters, it is nothing but discussing the topic, applying a theoretical framework, following an approach. I really appreciate the scholar who has who has convinced you, though my intention is never to convince anybody, only to express myself and substantiate my argument. Yes, I told you initially also, some topics, some fields, they need not follow a rigid structure. I have made this clear during my talk. And I always, I endorse the opinion of the other scholar who says, discuss, discuss. And out of this discussion, the introduction and the conclusion should evolve, should come out. I told you, out of my experience, out of people that I have seen, that I have discussed, I have met, and I have seen, and I have been working with. For all these people, my suggestion is never worry about the introduction, because introduction will be kind of a hurdle for many of you to begin with. Instead of that, take the thematic chapters, or in any way that you decide about with your supervisor, you can decide the structure of your thesis. What should be in the second chapter, third chapter, fourth chapter, fifth chapter, sixth, depending on the number of chapters. No, I completely agree, Mr. Ibrahim, and I am with that scholar only. I endorse him.
All right, thank you.
If there are no questions, it's time for many of us in India to have our dinner. Maithili madam, I think you agree with me.
Thank you, sir,
Doc,
for your
last question.
informative presentation.
Last question.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Doc, can you please highlight it for us? The various structure that you gave us, the abstract, the introduction, literature review, theory framework, method, results, discussion, conclusion. In our thesis, can you give us a minimum number of words for each of these sections? A fair idea of minimum number of words. Very important.
No, I would not give you words, but definitely I would give you number of pages.
Okay.
Number of
thank you.
pages.
Thank you.
A good research thesis must have 200 pages, A4 pages, 200 pages. And it can be extended up to 220. I'm only talking about the chapters, the content, the gist. Like, for example, around 50 to 55 in the introduction, the remaining 40, 40, 40, 40. I'll take one around 220 and 6 chapters. First chapter is an introduction, about 50 pages, not more than that. Introduction, where I'm going to include literature review also. My literature review, methodology, all those things will be included in the introduction only. It encompasses all these things. Therefore, it becomes 50 pages. Another 40 pages, the next 4 chapters, around 40. Need not be 40, around 40. So this 50 plus another 160, 210, another 10 to 12 pages of conclusion. 220, 225 maximum. This would be a good thesis actually, and you can also reduce that. Introduction, you can make it only 40 pages also. And 35, 35, 35, 40 plus 180 plus 20. That depends on the nature of your topic, the methodology, the approach that you take, and you should be able to convince your supervisor. Many things come into matter there. I think I have answered your question, Mr. Ibrahim.
Yes, Doc.
So
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. A follow up, just a quick
Thank
one.
you, sir. Thank you.
Just a quick one, sir. Yeah, can I go ahead?
Please.
Yes. What of a research article? Can you give us a fair idea of minimum number of words for each of the sections? A research article, not a thesis. I'm taking you away a little from your thesis.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, it depends on the journal. Many journals, they demand a word limit. A good research journal should not be less than 3,500 words. I'm talking about the minimum. 3,500 words is the minimum word limit for a good article, good research article.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Doc. Thank you. Very, very good presentation. And I have really learned a lot from you. And we are really going to use it in our pursuit for our journey in education. Thank you. Thank you. Very fantastic presentation.
Mr. Ibrahim, I'm very happy to talk to an African because I have served in Africa for 8 years. Northeast Africa and North Africa. And your accent, it reminds me of so many other students.
Thank you. It's a privilege. Thank you.
Yeah. Sare.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your informative presentation.
Sir, may I ask a question, sir?
Yes, sir.
Sir, actually, I want to say while preparing the questionnaire, I have a small doubt. I don't know where to use the semantic scale and where to use the Likert scale. Can you differentiate between the semantic scale and Likert scale, sir?
Sir, I am a man of letters, literature background, and you're asking some very highly technical question. I request you to post this question to Balaji, sir. He has shared the mail ID. If not, I'll request Joyson Satya to give his mail ID, and he will be able to do complete justice to that. I'm sorry, it is beyond my purview.
No problem,
I'm
sir. It's okay,
please.
sir. Fine. Sir, another question is there. Which research has a more value? Empirical or, like,
Sir, it depends again on the, if it is mathematics,
okay, sir. Okay. It's fine, sir. Fine.
it depends. It depends on the nature of your subject
Okay, sir.
and your supervisor's approval.
Sir, but I want to know which research has the more clarity, which research has a more value, either empirical or, like,
Sir, the moment you say research, there should be clarity.